What's up, guys? Welcome back to I'm Outraged. What a crazy time. I just watched the Podfather's backstage pass. Very poignant, as usual. Matt Kelly is always great at articulating his thoughts and kind of cutting to the root of what's going on. My thing is, I'm not going to preach. I don't do it. You don't see me do it on social media. You guys won't see me do it in the chats. It's nowhere, because as important as I think it is about speaking out, I also look at it like you guys are paying a service for a particular thing. And if you want my opinion on things, you guys can always reach out to me. But the service that I'm going to provide you is more about what you bought into originally, which was fantasy football, a personality, all those things. And I prefer not to mix the two. But I also want to let people know that I do make myself available, more so, I believe, than most people in the industry. If you've reached out to me before on Patreon, if you've DM'd me, I've replied back to just about everybody. And oftentimes it's at length, regardless of what the question is. So I'm always reaching out to people, and I'm trying to create an experience that's different than other places. As much as I'm trying to build a community, I also want to make myself the center of that community. So whether it's the Discord chat or in the drafts or on Patreon, creating topics where I'm creating communication amongst everybody, because one topic isn't maybe what drives the next person. Some of you guys see these trade question posts that I do, and you get involved there. Other people see the posts that I do for these weekly podcasts, and you get involved there. So I'm trying to create different avenues of things that are going to trigger an illicit response out of different people and give you guys just a wide array of things. I don't have anything but time to give, and I know time is immensely valuable, but as you guys are aware, I always give it. So in times like these, if you guys have questions about anything, feel free to reach out. Obviously, it's a fantasy football thing, and I love sticking to that, and this is what I love to do. And I hope people are staying safe during what I consider is the craziest year of my existence, from the COVID-19 situation to these riots. I mean, things are at a boiling point. So I hope this is a place where people can come for something different, get involved with these big 16-team drafts, get involved with these posts that I'm making, and I'm going to continue to do things that are going to help keep people's minds off of these subjects, because it's what I love to do, and I hope it's something that you guys enjoy being a part of. And again, I truly appreciate everybody who supports what I'm doing over here. For all the people that are engaging in the leagues, on social media, taking advantage of all these opportunities, I truly appreciate it. And to even those that just like to play the background and spectate and read the analysis and listen to the podcast and get into a league or whatever it is you want to do, I appreciate those people as well. So let's keep this party rolling, and I love all forms of interaction. So continue to reach out to me, questions about fantasy, whatever it is, I'm available. That's what I'm telling you, okay? The Outraged Jew is always available to you during these crazy times. We're going to get through them. But in this area, this is a sanctuary, and we're going to continue to have fun here. So all forms of interaction are accepted, with the exception of one. There's one form of interaction in fantasy football that drives me absolutely bonkers. And you've all run across this guy. It's a particular player in a league, and I admittedly, I've been this guy in the past, but I realize how much of a douchebag he is, and we should all do our best to look in the mirror and say, am I this douchebag that he's talking about right now? Because nobody wants to be this guy. I can't stand this guy. You can't stand this guy. The guy that I'm talking about is the offended trade offer guy. I didn't even know this was a thing when I first got into fantasy football. When I first started playing, like many of you, we didn't know who these incoming rookies were. I didn't know who these obvious talented players were. I was just getting into this fantasy football world. It's different than watching real football. The way scoring's set up, the way that you pick players and draft and the rounds and the value. We didn't know these things when we got in. So when you send an offer to a guy, if he doesn't like it, he can just smash decline it. That's fine, but you know how it goes. Many of us prefer for one of these people to respond with at least a sentence. Just go, hey man, the value's not there for me. Or, hey man, I think we may disagree on this player. I think that this guy's going to be a lot better in 2020 going forward, blah, blah, whatever. A lot of people don't like when you just hit decline. And I try to reach out to everybody, even when I decline deals, because as we've got these 16-team leagues going, I have declined offers because a lot of us are learning as we're going. Now, admittedly, for many of you, you're in one 16-team league, one of these I'm Outraged leagues. For me, I'm in 3, plus I'm in an extra Underworld one. So I'm going in almost 4 leagues now. So by the time I've gotten into this 3rd league, I figured it out. I figured out how where the value falls. I figured out who's going to be where. I know all these things, but most of you guys don't. So in these leagues, you're going to play them different than me. And you're going to try to make trades, and you're going to send deals, and you're going to realize that the value's not there eventually, but we're all learning. So I'm not going to get offended by it. But you've got these guys out there that just get so fucking offended when you send them a deal that's dog shit. Now look, if it's a dog shit deal, you know what I do? When it's a really bad deal, like let's say somebody wants Saquon Barkley offer me, and they offer me a 2021 first and James White. And then they try to put some analysis. Well, James White's going to catch as many balls as Sony Michel or as Saquon Barkley, and then you can add a 2021 first, and you can draft a running back, and you're like, okay, hold on. Hold on a minute. This is maybe the worst trade that I've seen ever, but I'm going to entertain it. Then what I do is I decline the trade and I counter it. Then I go to their roster and I pick their best player, and then I offer up my shittiest player or my kicker or my defense for them. And that's kind of like my response to it if I'm going to get crazy. But I refuse to get offended and actually respond to, say, somebody and go, do you even understand what the value is here? This is bullshit. Don't send me these garbage trades. Like, you only have 12 people in a league, and you're one of them. So you got 11 people to trade with. Now, admittedly, I've burned some bridges over the years talking shit in fantasy football leagues. Some people, they don't want to deal with me anymore. That's fine. I'm beyond that now. I understand how this works. But if your roster is bad, you have to keep lines of communication open. When you've got a dominant roster, you can slide a little bit. I've got a lot of really good rosters, so I might talk a little more shit in those leagues, because if I had a bad roster, I'd have to be a lot nicer to people, because eventually I'm going to have to go to them for a deal. And I don't want to burn every fucking bridge in the city. I need at least one bridge to be able to cross over the river and go over there and have a conversation. But the guy who gets offended is the ultimate fantasy football douchebag. Listen, it's not real life. As Matt Kelly has said and many others have said, it's a game within a game. So if somebody sends you a deal and you're that offended by it, don't respond with some douchebag response. Just go, hey, look, man, we don't see eye to eye on this deal. I feel like I need more value for this player. Let's see if we can counter. Or, hey, this player is not for sale. Because a lot of people say every player on my roster is for sale. Dude, that's not true. Not every player on my roster is for sale. I have some guys that I just will not sell. Like Christian McCaffrey, for example, or many others. They're in that window where their value is incredibly difficult to match. It would take so many pieces to add up. But eventually, as he gets older, that value decreases a little bit to a point where he's still valuable to another owner. And now we can find some form of a trade to make it work. Maybe when Christian McCaffrey's 26, 27, maybe then I'll consider making a move for a younger back. But when they're so hyper young and so hyper productive, there's just no real conceivable way to trade him. And why would you trade him? He could be the RB1 again. He could outscore the field by a huge number again. So when people come to you for those guys, it's just some players aren't for sale. And that's the way it is. And I know many owners, they go, oh, yeah, no, every player's for sale. And that's bullshit when you say you won't sell somebody. Look, man, we're all trying to win the fucking league. What do you want me to do? Trade my best guy for 7 first-round draft picks so maybe one of them hits? But I don't understand. The point of fantasy football is to put the most points up per week as you can to make it to the finals and win the title. So why in the world would I send away, far and away, the highest scorer of all skill positions, aside from Lamar Jackson in fantasy football, for 5 first-round picks? Sounds great on the surface, but I'm just not that interested. And maybe in this class, if it was Jonathan Taylor or something like that, and we could discern what's going on, maybe I would do it. But I'm not blindly today selling you Christian McCaffrey for all these first-round picks in 2021. I don't even know what the class looks like at this point, let alone if there will be college football. So on the other side of the coin, you've got the guy that gets offended at the guy that won't move a player. That's the same guy that gets offended when he gets a bad deal. So my contention is, if you get an offer that sucks, there's 2 ways to handle it. One, you can be informative, constructive, and you can tell the person how you feel without trying to throw your own analysis in there. You can just say, look, this deal doesn't work for me. I need more. I believe this about this player. Or you can do it the way I have before if you want to be the offended guy, and this is me back in the day. You send them the trade that asks for their best player for a shit player, because if you know that this guy knows better, then it's a funny response. But if you know that this guy doesn't know better, then you kind of come off as a dick again. So there's just a form of education that takes place in these leagues, and a lot of you guys don't have time. But as I've said to you, I try to give as much time as I can to people. Even though it's valuable, I do give it. So I'm just trying to educate people in the leagues, but these guys that get offended. In fact, I had a patron message me. He DM'd me. And he said, Nate, he goes, read this message, because he got an email back on an FFPC league. And he goes, it's a best ball league. And he goes, was I insulting with this trade? And the trade was Jalen Reagor for David Montgomery and a 2021 third in best ball. It's a dynasty league. Look, if it's seasonal, then I could see why David Montgomery would be the play. But in dynasty, when it's going to go on forever, there's a lot of questions about these 2 players. And I think a lot of people love Jalen Reagor, especially in a best ball format. So is Jalen Reagor for David Montgomery in a 2021 third that far off? Not really. I don't think it's that far off. And it also depends on how big the league is and what the scarcity of the position is. We already know that running back is difficult. As more teams transition into running backs by committee, we understand that finding high volume running backs is difficult. But I, on the surface, don't think that trade is that far apart. I just don't. But I can understand why somebody might reject the trade and might want more value with Jalen Reagor, perhaps, but not to the level that it's insulting. So to that patron, no, I don't think that was insulting in the least. And many of us, when we make trades, we send a starter version of the trade out. If you've been playing fantasy football long enough, the first offer you usually send is not the best offer you're willing to send. We all know that. Nobody throws their best offer out first. And if you do, good for you. You're a real honest guy. But that's not how you win in fantasy football. The way you win is, rather than going to your absolute peak of what you're willing to give, you start at 70%. And you're either transparent with the guy and you say, hey, look, I'm starting here, blah, blah, blah. Let's build from here. Or you go, look, the best I can give you is this and this for that. But in your mind, really, you're willing to go a little further. Because you know that if this guy's a good fantasy football player, he comes back and goes, well, I need a little more. Would you be willing to toss him, blah, blah, blah. And eventually, you probably meet at where you were willing to go anyways. But getting offended by offers, and especially getting offended by offers that on the surface aren't as bad as they look, makes you look like an awful player in the league, and it kills interaction. And guys never want to go back to you again. And I've had this happen in so many leagues, and I do my best to try to keep these lines of communication open, but you can't win with some of these guys. Sometimes when people draft players, they've got lock in their brain. They go, this is my guy. I own him. Or they have a guy that they draft in every league, and they have him ranked higher than anybody else in the whole universe. And because of that reason, their evaluation of him, their assessment of him is way higher than anybody else's. We all rank our own players with more value on our roster than we do when we're trying to acquire those same players on someone else's roster. So we have to understand these fundamental differences. But the guy that gets upset or feels like he's being insulted by a trade is one of the most hysterical things that you could ever do in fantasy football. It's a fucking game. So you gotta let it go. And especially in times like these, just have some fun, man. Just be honest with people. If you know the guy knows better, send him that funny counteroffer. And then when he goes, that trade's worse than the one that I sent you, go, yeah, okay. Why don't you come correct on the next deal and we can go from there. But we're doing all these 16-team leagues, and I've seen trades like this, offers like this come into my inbox. And I don't get offended. I try to reply to everybody. I try to say, hey, look, man, the value's not there for this deal, or I think there's enough players on the board right now that I'm going to go ahead and sit on my pick, or whatever. I'm honest. And everybody typically responds well. They go, okay, man, I understand. Thanks for hitting me back. But in a 16-team league like this, and again, we just filled up the third I'm Outraged Dynasty League. Matt Kelly's in it. I'm in it. Brad Ziegler's in it. I have a lot of people that still want to get into a fourth league. I mean, we have about 140 patrons or something like that. So there's a lot of people that want to get into these leagues. So I am willing to start a fourth league if we fill it up. Now, as I've stated in the messages, I want to get people that haven't been in 1, 2, or 3. One of those leagues, I want to fill the next league with people who aren't in it. And if I build another league, I will go get a different fantasy analyst and I will put them in that league as well. Just a guest fantasy analyst to make it fun because I'm having a great time. And in these 16-team leagues, because I've done so many, I'm starting to understand who has the most late round value because it's a super flex league. It's a start 2 tight end premium league. There's 3 additional flex spots, start 2 running backs, start 3 receivers. Huge benches. It's tough. And we know that there's positional scarcity at running back, and that's what makes it the hardest. A lot of guys want to nail running back. Most guys go running back early in typical formats, but you can imagine in a 16-team league, you have to almost do it earlier, or you wait a little later and try and pop a guy like Darius Geis, and he floats, or Kareem Hunt, because he floats a little bit, because we assume that he's in Cleveland right now, but is that his long-term future? No, most of us don't think it is. Most of us think he goes somewhere else eventually. So those are the guys that are kind of hanging around with value if you decide to punt running back a little bit. But 2 guys consistently that hang around, and in seasonal leagues this is different, but in Dynasty, these are 2 guys that you can grab much later at the running back position if you decide to punt early, especially in a 16-team league. And they have question marks, but they also have upside. And the first one of the 2 is David Montgomery. And that shouldn't be a surprise to people. In the drafts that I've seen so far, and I have 2 that are pretty much beyond round 12 or 13. These are 24-round drafts. David Montgomery has gone 6.1 in one of them, which is about fair. I mean, that's about the sweet spot where he should go, maybe a smidge later. And then I've seen him go at 8.2 in another league. Now, in 12-team leagues on MFL, he's going in the middle of the 5th, but his latest pick 143, and that's the end of the 11th round. And we know, if nothing else, David Montgomery is going to push for massive workload in 2020. And his current price tag is so low. I mean, why wouldn't you add him? And I know many of us, including myself, don't believe he's a game changer, but as it's been stated so many times before, volume is king. And he's coming off of a rookie year. And that's important to note too, because there have been players in the past that have struggled and have put up numerous, or at least similar production to him. We've seen it with Jonathan Stewart was one of the big names that I saw. And again, there's a difference in athleticism, but some of these guys can work out of a hole. And there's a lot of reasons why David Montgomery might be the guy that's actually set to do a lot better in 2020 than he did in 2019. And we don't know. I mean, who's to say that we don't see a different runner in 2020 once Nick Foles eventually takes over under center? Because that's the big turning point for a lot of people. The change at quarterback. Mitchell Trubisky has been terrible. Defenses play him differently than they're going to play Nick Foles. So the hope is that we get that transition at quarterback, and that's good for Allen Robinson, and that's going to be much better for David Montgomery. And David Montgomery certainly hasn't had the advantage of a solid offensive line in front of him. I don't know what people think his offensive line situation looked like, but it hasn't been good while he's in Chicago. I mean, for starters, on Football Outsiders in adjusted line yards, the Chicago Bears rank number 29 in run blocking. So they're already one of the worst teams in the league at run blocking. And that's evident. And then when you look on playerprofiler.com, he was the number 57 running back in run blocking efficiency. So again, that is a direct correlation with those adjusted line yards. So we know that the Chicago O-line was garbage. But then David Montgomery also ranked as the RB 44 in extra defenders in the box in 2019. So it's not like David Montgomery had all this room to work. Now, I know we talked about him in college being a tackle breaker and creating yards after contact and all these other things, but thus far in Chicago, he hasn't had the ability to do so. They haven't had the quarterback play. They haven't had the offensive line play. He was a rookie. He's not the greatest of athletes, but it's not an advantage to be an average athlete and then have a poor offensive line in front of you. But as everybody has noted, if you see the offseason videos, he looks great on video running around trash cans. Right? I mean, that's what he's doing. He's cutting around trash cans, working with the footwork king. And that could help. I mean, that could certainly help David Montgomery entering this next year. And many people believe that he's going to push for over 300 touches in 2020. So that's also a big value if you're somebody that's drafting him late. Because he enters 2020 with no real competition for touches. I mean, we all know that Tariq Cohen is there. And we know that Tariq Cohen is going to have his role, but we believe that both of these guys can coexist. And if you look back to 2019, David Montgomery was already being targeted 2 times per game, a number that is expected to rise in 2020, especially if Nick Foles eventually transitions to under center. If that number bumps to over 3 targets a game, let's say, then suddenly he's pushing into that Mark Ingram 50 target a season range. And he already finished inside the top 25 in 2019 on just 35 targets. So there's a chance that with the increased rushing volume, with the offensive efficiency of the line increasing, with Nick Foles under center, with more of a threat in the passing game with Anthony Miller in an additional year, with Allen Robinson, with Cole Kmet there, with these additions and Nick Foles at quarterback, that they could spread the field a little more, that could open things up for David Montgomery a little more. There's a chance that in 2020, he easily finishes inside the top 20 at the running back position. And you're getting this guy in the 8th round of a 16-team startup league? Click him all day long, because it's not inconceivable that David Montgomery has a monster 2020. And if you purchase him late, you can sell him high and reap the benefits of being a smart drafter. Sometimes when I'm staring at 2 players and I just cannot decide, one of the breaking points for me is which guy is going to give me the most value in the future. Even if I don't plan to hold him forever. It's the same thing if you've been listening to the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast with me and Matt Kelly. I kept doing it in the rookie drafts. I'm looking for the guy that's going to pop late. David Montgomery's being slept on. People don't like him. There's narratives about his athleticism. We just talked about it. The bad offensive line, the quarterback play, all these things have not been favorable. But if they are, and if the volume increases, how could he be inefficient in the future? I mean, there's so much to like about his profile in 2020 that if he's around later in these drafts, in the late 7th, in the 8th, in the 9th, then you have to auto draft him. You just have to take him. You have to click draft because he will return the value. Because in a league where the running back position is deficient, it is scarce, you can sell a guy like this for value, and that's what you do, and you can use him. I mean, he's going to have productive games in 2020. So I'm not as concerned about David Montgomery as other people. I'm not taking him early. That's the big caveat in this take that I have. You don't take him early. But if he happens to fall to you late, then you draft him because he has so much more upside than many other people, and especially a guy that's going to get 300 touches. Volume is king, and the production will come with it. And if he finishes inside the top 20 this year, and you drafted him late in a startup, then that's a huge win. But he's not the running back that I think is the most slept-on running back thus far in this offseason. He's not the most valuable running back so far in this offseason, especially in these 16-team leagues, because as I've done these, my mind has been blown at how this is shaking out every single time because I draft him every single time he's available. Sony Michel, man, that name that name splits the crowd right down the middle. Some of you love him. Some of you hate him. I'm down the middle on him. I actually think that, again, Sony Michel is better than he's being projected. And in the drafts that I've been in so far, I've seen Sony Michel fall to the very end of the 9th round and the very beginning of the 10th round. He fell between Antonio Gibson and Ronald Jones in one draft. And then in the next draft, he fell between Antonio Gibson and Anthony McFarland. But when he entered the league as a rookie, wasn't this a guy that was a consensus top 3 to 5 running back in his class? Everybody loved Sony Michel coming into the league. I don't understand what changed, but you go look at MFL and you look at their ADP. He's an early 9th round pick, but he's been as late as pick 191. He went in the 15th round of a startup draft. The 15th round of a startup draft. It's amazing. And again, that's 12 team, but the 15th round of a startup draft. And in New England, he really has zero competition, unless you consider Damian Harris, who couldn't sniff the field last year in New England and has spent his entire college career in a timeshare as well as a threat. Maybe some of you do. And if you want to hedge Sony Michel, you can grab Damian Harris late. You can do that. And yes, we know that Sony Michel hasn't flashed as a pass catcher yet. But unfortunately for him, he landed in a spot in New England that wasn't the best to unlock it. But look at what he's been up against as he's been playing in New England. The New England Patriots were number 58 in run blocking efficiency. So he hasn't had great run blocking. While Sony Michel has also seen the 9th highest level of average defenders in the box. Few guys are seeing more defenders in the box than Sony Michel. So it's not a surprise that he struggled a little bit last year. And despite Tom Brady ratcheting up the pass attempts, the heat wasn't reduced on Sony Michel as a runner. He was still battling out there. But I'm not advocating for Sony Michel to be selected early, as he finishes the RB31 last year in PPR leagues. But let's spin a scenario. He's 25 years old, so he's still very young. This is a guy that's very athletic. I mean, he tested well, and a lot of people, again, supported him as he entered the league. This is a former first-round pick just a few years ago. They added no discernible competition around him, especially when you factor in that Damian Harris didn't even touch the field last year, in a backfield that was struggling all over the place with starters. And the problem is, he averages 1.25 targets per game just last season. And we hope that that number moves. Because if it moves even a full digit, if he averaged over 2 targets a game, then suddenly that puts him in a trajectory of 40 targets or so in 2020, which starts to bump him up the line a little bit. And we hope that that's the case for him because he proved that he is a relevant pass catcher while at Georgia. But again, New England has been a different animal over the years, whether it was Shane Vereen, James White, Brandon Bolden. They bring in all these other guys as pass catchers. They've done it forever. Annually, it happens. So it's a rough spot to end up in. But when you look at Sony Michel, let's go back to 2019. The final 6 games of 2019, Sony Michel was averaging 4.27 yards per carry. 5 of his last 6 games over 4 yards a carry. He was flashing again at the end of the year. This is a guy that had multiple 100-yard rushing games in 2018, plus multiple 100-yard rushing games in the playoffs. Numerous touchdowns in the playoffs. I mean, he carried them to a Super Bowl. Sony Michel was fantastic. There was a little fall off in 2019, but this is a player who flashed heavily in 2018 and saw a lot of carries in 2019 and is expected to be the feature running back in New England in 2020. So what's the risk in taking Sony Michel? It's not like you're paying some premium price tag for him. You're getting him in the 9th round. You're getting him in the 10th round of startup drafts. Guys are taking Antonio Gibson over him. We've never even seen Gibson on an NFL field. And if Darius Geis bounces back as expected, you might never see him on an NFL field. Guys are taking 4th round pick Anthony McFarland over Sony Michel. What are you guys chasing here? Since 1936, the only truly fantasy relevant running backs that have come out of the 4th round have been Lamar Miller, Devonta Freeman, James White, and I guess Marlon Mack. And that's it. And that's in 84 years of football history. That's all that there is. And you guys are theorizing that you want to take Anthony McFarland over former first-round pick Sony Michel. You've lost your fucking minds. Value doesn't fall like this all the time. It's a rare case when you have a player that the team hasn't necessarily fallen out of favor with. Has anybody heard negatives about Sony Michel? They didn't draft anybody this year. They didn't add a free agent. They didn't add Devonta Freeman or Carlos Hyde. None of those guys made it to this roster. So all you have is James White, who's going to maintain his pass-catching role. And then you have Damian Harris behind him. And it's a non-Tom Brady era. The game has been changed. We don't know what to expect from the Jarrett Stidham era in New England, whether it's going to be short, whether it's going to be long. We do know this, though. We know that Sony Michel will get his opportunities. Sony Michel had over 240 carries in 2019, played a full season. So the expectation is that Sony Michel will again get a volume role in 2020. And if he surprises and suddenly turns on the pass-catching prowess that he flashed at Georgia, if this is a guy that sees 260 carries and sees 50 targets or 60 targets, suddenly we're talking about a guy that's easily inside the top 20. And he's going off the board at pick, I don't even know, we're in the 10th round? Guys are taking fucking Anthony McFarland over him? We don't know that the Pittsburgh Steelers don't re-sign James Conner. They say they're not going to. We don't know. They've got Jalen Samuels there. They've got Benny Snell there. What a clusterfuck of a situation. We know that Sony Michel has been the guy for 2 years in New England, and in 2018, he was incredible. So what's the concern with taking him that late? Nobody's telling you to take Sony Michel in the 3rd or the 4th round. But when you're in the 10th round of a rookie start or of a startup draft, or the 11th round of a startup draft, and you're out there clicking fucking DJ Dallas and Anthony McFarland and Antonio Gibson over Sony Michel, a guy who could, again, pop way harder than these guys, has way less competition to get on the field than these guys, and has already proven it at an NFL level. When you're taking those 3 guys over Sony Michel in startup drafts, you're costing yourself a ton of value, and I can tell you right now, it's going to blow up in your face.